We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University, with undergraduate and graduate programs part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. We begin today with history in the making. Yet to be determined is how it will be written. That's Paul McKee's multi-billion-dollar Northside Regeneration project. Two St. Louis public radio reporters have been taking a close look and are finding that the project that has been controversial from the beginning remains so. Reporters Rachel Lippmann and Petrin join me in studio. We'll look at where the project is and where it may or may not be going. Thank you both for being with me. Nice to have you.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, let me begin with you. This is an ever-tangled web, isn't it?
Oh, boy. So. Yeah. I mean, the number of different rabbit holes that Kay and I could have crawled down to report the story and just sort of pulled out kind of kept growing and growing and growing as we looked at documents and documents and documents and documents. I mean, the number of trees we have probably killed in doing this project is not something we really want to admit to. But yeah, and the big thing, too, is that it's been shrouded in a lot of just secrecy and mystery, even back from when McKee was first buying up properties on the north side under all of these different names of companies, not really knowing who the owner was. This one agreement that I took a look at in my piece is future assurances agreement, negotiated sort of in private without a whole lot of input from aldermen who have been overseeing this development. Even last night, I was at a hearing on this special area they want to put around the NGA site to control what businesses can open up in certain areas of there. It's all just very confusing and mysterious to these residents, and a lot of the stuff that should be public-facing in some ways isn't. And I think Kay kind of found a lot of the examples of that.
Yeah, accountability is a big part of your story, Kay.
Yeah, so I took a look at some of the specific documents that should have been created sort of throughout this process to inform people what exactly was going on. And I found a couple different things that were sort of odd and ended up focusing in on something that was supposed to be an online database of complaints recorded about properties, their resolutions, just dates and processes and sort of accountability for solving any sort of property maintenance issues. And this was supposed to be available to a bunch of different entities in the city, from the Citizen Service Bureau to the inspector's office to police departments. And the inspector's office had not heard of it. Police departments said they didn't have it. Citizen Service Bureau said they didn't have it. And I went to Paul McKee and was like, hey, where is this? And he's like, oh, it's in my office. You can go there in person and in our office in Northside, and you can look at all the spreadsheets there. And so there's some uncertainty about whether or not that really fulfills the letter and spirit of the agreement. SLDC says, this should have been online. People should be able to see this online. And so that was sort of the main gist of accountability, is this document that people should have been able to, see the property maintenance happening in real time. And
what are the residents saying? I mean, they were supposed to be getting this information, and they're not, apparently. So what are they saying?
The residents are really frustrated. A lot of them, so the person who's sort of supposed to be keeping track of all this, and who does keep track of at least some of it, is an ombudswoman named Delonia Winston. And a lot of the residents knew that she existed and that she was sort of around and worked for Paul McKee. But a lot of them say, they had no idea that she was taking complaints, and they had no idea that she was recording them either. And they just didn't know about this, even though in the agreement it explicitly says that Northside Regeneration was supposed to inform them and make it so that they had a clear, simple system for sort of navigating all of this.
So, Rachel, where did that put us now in terms of where we are?
Well, where we are right now is there is some question about, first of all, what deal is actually in control of this entire agreement. In both 2009 and 2014, the St. Louis Board of Aldermen approved these two redevelopment plans. And those two were basically the same thing, $390 million in tax incentives spread out over about a 2-square-mile area of North St. Louis, a total of $8 billion in development that McKee was going to put in. The 2014 agreement extended some deadlines. They were coming off of of a lawsuit, the Great Recession. They thought it was fair to extend the deadlines, open up all of the area to development incentives. In 2015 and 16, the city began to negotiate to keep the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's western headquarters here in St. Louis. They were originally going to use the Pruitt-Igoe land, which is at the corner of the southeast corner of Cass and Jefferson Avenues by the fire department. And that would have been an easy solution because it was one piece of property owned by one person. It wasn't big enough for the security needs of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. They needed a larger area to be able to put in a security barrier. So they went to look, our security border. They looked then north of Cass at a site on the what turns out to be the northeast corner of Cass and Jefferson, where it was a whole mishmash of owners. And one of the things that the federal government required was that if they wanted to build the site, it all had to be under the control of one owner. So the city and Northside Regeneration and the Bank of Washington, which had lent a lot of money to McKee, negotiated basically a new redevelopment deal whereby the land would be sold at a discount to the city because they needed the property, and the redevelopment agreement would be renegotiated. Deadlines got extended again, and instead of focusing on specific projects that had to be completed, it was a specific amount of development that had to happen in X amount of time. It was supposed to go to the Board of Aldermen for approval. It never did. There is no record that it was ever even introduced at the board. The city is saying now, after it declared default, said McKee wasn't living up to his deadlines, that, oh, well, we've declared you in default of this separate agreement. And what McKee and the bank are saying is basically, you are negotiating on behalf of the city here and holding yourself out to be representative of the city as this political entity. And that's going to have to be fought out in court. And the Bank of Washington has already sued, saying, sort this out. We negotiated this deal to give up title to this land in good faith, and we don't believe we had a good faith partner on the other side. So that's kind of where we are. Work is underway on a gas station and a grocery store. It's sort of the first major construction that has happened in the Northside area. The site of the new NGA is cleared and seeded to keep the dust down. Construction on that is supposed to start in 2019. I believe the land will get turned over to the federal government in 2018. So not a whole lot of work has been done, and it's not entirely clear what the deadlines were, where, when, why, who, how.
And, Kay, people have to be reminded that this has been going on for 10 years. It was 10 years ago, wasn't it, that whole thing started? So the next steps are unclear, unknown?
Courts. I mean, this is going to be tied up in court. The Bank of Washington, which again was a lender to Paul McKee for a lot of the land assembly that he did, and had title to some of the land in that NGA site that was needed, they are the ones who have sued the city over the city declaring default. The city has turned around and is trying to say that they have clear title to all of this land, and therefore Bank of Washington has no claim in its lawsuit. Separately, the state of Missouri has sued Paul McKee over his use of a tax credit to build some of that land.
You cover the Board of Aldermen. You've mentioned the fact that they have as many questions, I guess, as most of us do. What is the mood like there with regard to the continuation of this project?
I don't know that they have a way to stop it right now. They, I suppose, could pass an ordinance to rescind the previous ordinance, which would be the redevelopment deal. But that's going to get you into a lot of breach of contract issues and probably need to another lawsuit. It'll be curious to see if there's an appetite. They have called for investigations into McKee and the development. We know there's a state investigation underway. We strongly suspect there's a federal investigation underway related to who knows what, maybe because it's a federal project with the NGA. I guess they could increase oversight. They could limit the authority of the St. Louis Development Corporation to negotiate redevelopment deals sort of behind their backs. But I have actually noticed a trend at the Board of Aldermen in terms of just incentives in general that really did start with McKee and sort of the amount he was asking, where we may be getting to the point where the objection isn't to what the project is, but the fact that it is getting incentives, and that would be enough, especially in the Central Corridor, to tank a redevelopment plan. So I don't know what the Board of Aldermen is really going to do with McKee or what their options are to do with Northside Regeneration, but I think this will continue to have an impact on how they look at and award incentives.
Kay, you've talked to Mr. McKee. Give us some sense of your conversations with him and how he seems to be reacting to all of this.
So I think the really big thing that you hear from Paul McKee is that, he says he's been doing his due diligence. He's abiding by the agreement that he and the Bank of Washington say is this primary agreement currently in effect, the Future Assurances Agreement. He says, under that, I'm good to go. He says, I've been recording all of this. I have proof that I've been doing everything. And the city is just, they're raking me over the coals. He talks a bit about how suddenly he's been getting all these property notices that he, never had issues with before. And there's a real sense that he is being punished for something that he didn't do wrong.
What kind of property notices? What are we talking about with them?
So there's a whole separate issue just related to the property maintenance. The sort of idea behind this property maintenance plan that the database was created as a result of was to keep an eye on how he's treating his properties, whether they're in good condition, whether they're following city code. And up until recently, a lot of people in the neighborhood said, these properties are falling apart. They're violating code. Why aren't you doing anything about them? And McKee says, the city didn't really send us. They'd ask us to board something up, but we would never have to really deal with it beyond that. And the city started sending him notices of violation that his properties are not consistent with code and that he has to build stairwells for buildings that don't have walls on some sides and things like that.
Which, of course, raises the question, which I think McKee is sort of asking, but why wasn't the city doing this before? Yeah. If this building isn't at code now, it wasn't at code probably 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. These were not, buildings that were in great shape, had been boarded up, mothballed, just seeking future development. A lot of these were older houses. Some of them, I think, were in better shape when he originally obtained them. But a lot of these were not necessarily up to code or in great shape to begin with. And so where was the city then? And I think that's what a lot of citizens and residents in the area want to know. In addition to McKee is wanting to know, what did I do wrong? And the city is sitting here going, or the residents are going, why wasn't the city doing it before? Yeah. My impression of McKee has always been that he's kind of a true believer. He, really thinks that he is the person called, picked, whatever you want to say, to come in and really revitalize the North Side, and that he's going to be the one to do it for whatever reason.
Do we know how much money he has into this project up to this point?
He says he's put his own money into it, but in terms of the amount that he's put into it, I don't know that he has ever, at least to us, put a number to it.
The NGA project, as you've mentioned, has been on the periphery of this thing pretty much. Is there... You're shaking your head.
Well, it's McKee will say that he is the one who saw that the NGA wanted to move, responded to their request for proposals, and, was instrumental in getting it done. And to some extent, he is right in that he could have played much harder hardball with the city in terms of, I will not sell, I will only sell at a premium, you're taking away land that I want to help develop. He had 60% of the parcels within that 99 square acre site that they eventually will build the NGA on. Once that title sort of gets turned over to the city, and that's the effort that the city has done to basically say, Bank of Washington, Northside Regeneration, you have no claim to any of this land whatsoever, it becomes sort of an island within this development. But this is what McKee is counting on to allow Northside Regeneration to sort of really happen. He thinks it's going to be the catalyst to rebuild the North Side.
Well, the NGA project obviously is a very, very big deal and very important for St. Louis. Is it in any way, in any sense, in any kind of jeopardy because of all of this?
That's a question.
Who knows?
We don't know.
Who knows? I am sure the Metro East delegation is keeping a very close eye on this.
They wanted it at Scott.
They wanted it at Scott. If you read the site selection report that was released back in 2016, Scott Air Force Base makes to a logical detached observer a heck of a lot more sense. It was clean land next to a secure facility already. The consideration was, of course, that you don't want to move 3,000 well-paying jobs out of the city of St. Louis, and that was what ultimately was sort of the overriding concern. But yeah, that's a question that we have: is did somehow the city, signing all of these different agreements and different sort of arms of the city signing and relying on different deals, put that land transfer in jeopardy? What the city argues in its response to the Bank of Washington lawsuit is that there is no way for you to unwind this deal. It's not just simply a matter of, Bank of Washington, you get title to this land back. They've already put out money. They've already done a ton of work on the site itself. But who knows?
The genie is out of the bottle as far as that is.
That is what the city is arguing.
One of the things that occurs to me is the fact that apparently it was President Obama who wanted the location here rather than Scott, because he wanted it in an urban area and to kind of perk up the economy here. But given the way the current administration in Washington wants to kind of undo everything and anything that Obama was involved in, that they might be amenable to moving back across the river.
I mean, it is always a possibility. The question is now, how far along are they? What deals have already been signed between the federal government and city agencies in terms of land clearance? Like, can you undo some of what's already been done? Had this come out, let's say, end of 2016, before you started seeing clearance work, before you had started all of the eminent domain cases that were required to get a hold of the necessary property, I think it would be a much different picture.
Right. We have a couple of tweets here I'd like to get into the record here. Jake writes, did McKee know that NGA wanted land on the near north side before anyone else? And was his redevelopment plan just a ruse to get the land on the cheap so he could personally profit with no intention to actually build anything? It's an interesting scenario, but it's pure conjecture, I would think, at this point.
I don't know that the timeline works out for that to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, he did start buying land up in like 2002, 2003, 2004, which would be early for the NGA to have been thinking about needing to move. Remember, NGA's role has really sort of cemented post-war on terror as drones have started to develop. And I just don't know if back in 2002, 2003, they were recognizing the need to do it. Now, McKee himself will tell you that he was instrumental in keeping it, so maybe he knew something was going on, but...
And that's also not to say that he maybe didn't know about it by 2012 when he bought 1,200 additional properties from the city, some of which he later sold back to them for the NGA. So that by that point, maybe he did know, but in 2002, I don't know that the NGA would have been
early in the game.
Yeah. I mean, that's awfully early, and I don't know what the timeline is for the federal government to say, 22 years down the line, we want to open this new spy facility, because the technology that exists now would not have existed back in 2002 for the NGA to use the tools that it has.
How politically well-connected is McKee?
Well enough that he's been able to keep going.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually just started poking around a little bit yesterday on the Missouri Ethics Commission website just to sort of look at who he donated to. And it wasn't large amounts he was throwing around, but back when he was trying to get a state tax credit passed, he was funneling some money through. I guess it's he does have Congressman Lacey Clay's former chief of staff working as sort of an attorney for Northside. So in that sense, he's politically connected well enough as he needs to be to sort of protect this project.
Another tweet here. Brett writes, McKee deceived the public from the start. City Hall aided and abetted him as well. Slay and the older people who allowed this need to be held accountable. That sound right?
I don't know that that's for us to say.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of sentiment to that. extent. And I think to some degree that's what we've been not quite exactly hearing from members of the current administration, but you definitely sort of get the sense sometimes when you ask questions like, well, we didn't do this. That was the last group.
Although the executive director of the St. Louis Development Corporation is the same person who was in place as this deal was being negotiated. However.
So I think that's up for everybody else to decide.
As we said earlier, it's a tangled web. One final question before we let you go. This is via Curious Lewis. Who dropped the ball in overseeing the results of his projects? How could he keep getting more properties without showing results previously?
I mean, Kay, you're the one who...
Yeah, that's something we've been trying to figure out. I that was a big question in my story just because, there were a lot of documents that people should have been receiving, and if they didn't receive them, who was checking up on it? So that is something I posed to the SLDC, at least in the case of a couple specific documents and just records related to McKee. And their response was that, well, we were supposed to be sort of keeping an eye on this, but, McKee had been communicating with us regularly, so we sort of assumed that he was being upfront. And that's the closest answer to that question we've gotten so far. Still looking into it.
So many entities involved in this. It's really hard.
It's an alphabet. One of the aldermen called it the alphabet soup. You've got, the LCRA, the LRA, the SLDC, the, ET phone home.
Thank you, Rachel Lippmann and Kay Petrin. Thank you. This is a complicated story, but you're making it less so with your reporting. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.